All right. Hello, my name is Megan Huff. I'm a curator with Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. I'm gonna kind of wait just a little bit to give people a chance to tune in. This is my very first Facebook Live video, so I am not sure how it's gonna go, but it's a big experiment. So I'll just give it maybe a minute to see what happens. All right. So, as I said, my name is Megan Huff. I'm a museum curator for Fort Vancouver National Historic Site. I also do a lot of our social media. So if you've chatted with us on Facebook or on Instagram, we've probably talked before. Hello. And so I can say with authority that this is the first Facebook Live event that Fort Vancouver has done. So here we go. So today I thought that I would kind of talk about the top 5 questions that I get as a museum curator for the National Park Service, whether I am giving people a tour in our fort's collection storage facility, or when I'm just out and about talking with people. So yeah, top 5 questions that I get. So number 1 is, the National Park Service has curators. Aren't national parks for nature and climbing and camping and wildlife, and curators work in museums? That is true. But there are museums, a lot of them, in the National Park Service. There are over 400 National Park Service sites in the United States, and that includes National Historic Sites, National Historical Parks, and a lot of places that you might not expect or might not think of first when you think of national parks. But they are very important to telling the story of America. Together, the national parks care for our nation's second largest museum collection, just behind the Smithsonian. Most national parks have a museum collection and a museum curator. So even those big natural parks like Yosemite or Grand Canyon or Yellowstone, that we mostly associate maybe with wildlife or nature, have museum collections and curators. National Park museum collections can include archaeological artifacts or scientific specimens, historic objects, and usually lots of archives. Archives might be historic photos and documents, but they also might be records of archaeological excavations that happened at the park, or even just documentation of the history of the park. National Park Service curators are responsible for giving these museum collections a high standard of care so that they last a long time in good condition, and we're also responsible for documenting the collection. So cataloging items and accessioning them so we always know where they are, and taking care of them in that paperworky kind of way. And curators also share our collection with the public by creating exhibits, adding information to our websites, and doing social media. So the second question that I get a lot is, where does the Fort Vancouver Museum collection come from? The National Park Service started doing archaeology at Fort Vancouver in 1947. And earlier in the 20th century, while the area where the reconstructed fort is now was part of Vancouver Barracks, and it was just an open field that the soldiers would use for drilling, the people in the city of Vancouver and local people were interested in the history of Fort Vancouver, and they wanted to locate where the fort was and create a memorial of some kind. But then 2 world wars and a Great Depression kept people busy for a while. But then in 1947, the National Park Service sent an archaeologist named Lewis Haywood to investigate and see if he could find the remains of the fort. And luckily for him, one of the first buildings he found underground was the remains of the fort's powder magazine. So this is a building that the people of the fort were using to store their black powder, which is very flammable and explosive. So the building that they built to store it in, the powder magazine, was made of stone and brick rather than wood like the other buildings in the fort. So the foundation of the powder magazine had survived fairly well underground. So once Kaywood found that foundation, he knew from looking at maps of the fort that he was in the southwest corner of the fort. So he was able to, from there, locate the stockade walls and some of the other buildings of the fort. And then other archaeologists later located more remains of buildings. And so that's why the reconstruction that you see of Fort Vancouver today is built on the archaeological footprint of the original fort that was there in the 1800s because of all that archaeology work. And we do still do archaeology at the fort today, often as part of compliance for construction work going on at the park. If you walk or bike or drive or jog through the park, you'll probably notice that there's always something going on in Vancouver Barracks, lots of improvements being made. And as that happens, there's a lot of archaeology that happens too. And because archaeologists have been working at Fort Vancouver since 1947, we have a huge collection of archaeological artifacts from all periods in the site's history. Individuals and families, both in our community and across the country, have also donated historic objects to the fort's collection. Most often, these donors are the descendants of people soldiers and officers and civilians who served at Vancouver Barracks, who have photographs or documents or other items that their ancestor kept. Donations to the park's museum collections do have tied to the site. So these donated items are often tied to a specific person or historical event that is connected to the park's history. And some items in the museum collection are also purchased by the service. For example, many of the antiques that you see in the reconstructed buildings of the fort were purchased by the park when they built those buildings. So the third question that I get a lot is, what is my favorite artifact or object in the collection? And it sort of changes day by day. And I'm feeling very nostalgic about the collection because I can't be with it right now. I'm working at home. But a couple of favorites of mine. One is actually a collection of letters that were sent by the McLaughlin family. So they're letters that were written by John McLaughlin, who is the chief actor of Fort Vancouver, to and from his uncles and cousins in Eastern Canada, and some letters from his son, John Jr., too. And the reason that those letters are one of my favorites is because they really all together kind of expose the McLaughlin family for being, or as being, just a normal family like ours, who has, or like any of ours, who have, they're arguing about money and who they like and each other's behavior and all these kinds of things. I think a lot of times we think of people in the past, and especially people in that Victorian period, as being sort of wax figurines, but they are some pretty lively letters, and I enjoy reading them a lot. John McLaughlin was a really good writer, I think. Some of the stuff that he wrote, his reports to the Hudson's Bay Company are kind of fun to write or read too. Another favorite, I love all the photographs in our collection because especially from the Vancouver Barracks era is usually when we see a lot of photos donated to the park. So I wanted to try to share one with you. We'll see how this goes. But this is a print off of a photograph in our museum collection. Oh, it's a little reversed. But this is the 8th Battery, stationed at Vancouver Barracks around the 1890s. And it's this photo, black and white, of this group of soldiers who are all kind of gathered around, standing and sitting or laying on the ground around a blanket. And on the blanket, they are playing what looks to be dice. And I think they have some things on the blanket that they are maybe betting for. And then this guy in the corner here, or in the side here, has a little dog with him. The soldiers were really fond of little dog mascots, and we found a lot of photos and other things that show these little dogs. And then this guy in the background here has an X over his head, so that is probably the person who owned this photo. He was in it, and he got a copy, and he marked himself just so everyone would know where he was, and then eventually his family ended up donating it. Let's see, and then I'll answer some questions that are coming up in the chat too, after I get through my most frequently asked questions. I guess my fourth question now is, what is the oldest artifact in the collection? And there are a few candidates. One big sort of category of candidates for the oldest item in our collection are our lithic items or stone items. So these include mortars and pestles, projectile points or arrowheads, or other kinds of stone tools that were made and used by Indigenous peoples in the Northwest who have lived here from time immemorial. So it could be something, or they could be things, depending on where they were found, that were made and used by people living at the fort, or something that was dropped and lost maybe by someone passing through the area 100 years earlier or much earlier. Another oldest artifact in our collection is our very famous, probably the most famous artifact in our collection, a Roman brick, which is popularly known as the kitty brick. This is a brick that's probably maybe 6 inches by 12 inches or so, but it is broken, so it's not the full brick. And it was found archaeologically, so found underground. And we had a student who was working, I think, on her dissertation, did an analysis of it, a chemical analysis, and found that it was of the same type that was used to create Roman structures in Britain when the Romans occupied Great Britain. And in the 19th century, some of these ruins were disassembled, and the bricks were used as ship's ballast. So heavy things that could go in the bottom of a ship to help the ship stay stable and steady and upright. And this particular brick is called the kitty brick and is famous because, well, this is what it looks like. It's sort of an orangey, reddish orange. And as it was drying, a little cat walked across it. And you can see, let's reverse, the little cat footprints right there. And I don't know about you all, we have 2 cats. I feel like I've been living very close to my cats these days. And this is exactly what a cat would do. That's a totally believable scenario. An ancient Roman cat walked across that brick. Another old artifact that we have in our collection is an Elizabethan coin. It's this very, very tiny coin, maybe a half inch across. It's pretty small, and it's silver. And on the front, it's very faded. It has the image of Queen Elizabeth I, and on the back, it has sort of her seal in the year 1562. And some people like to think of that as a proof that Sir Francis Drake was in the Northwest at one point, but it was found archaeologically, and the archaeological deposit in which it was found was associated with Vancouver barracks. So it might have been a coin collecting soldier or officer who lost it at some point, but it is pretty cool. And then my last frequently asked question is, how do you become a museum curator, and what advice do I have for young people maybe, or people who are looking to switch careers who want to become a curator? And for me, I I attended school at the University of Washington, and I have an undergraduate in history and art history and a master's degree in what's called museology or museum studies, which is a program at the University of Washington. There are other museum studies programs nationwide. The University of Washington also has a museum studies certificate program. And we've had several interns and volunteers from that program as well. And my advice for becoming a curator is if you're just starting out, to do any job, basically, to start out. I began my career in museums by volunteering to do the coat check at the Seattle Art Museum. And then I sold tickets at the art museum, and then I worked in the curator's office, or actually I interned in the curator's office at the Seattle Art Museum. So start at the bottom, work your way up. So let's see, we do have one question from Tiffany. What is the strangest or most unexpected thing that's been found during digs at the fort? That would be a good question for the archaeologists. But I think, it's sort of that thing like the Elizabethan coin that I just talked about. That was found a while ago before anyone who's on staff now was here. But I am sure that they did not expect to find an Elizabethan coin at Fort Vancouver. But, that's kind of the nature of our site. There's so many people and so many stories. And like I said, was there a coin collecting soldier or officer who lost this very strange artifact and then years later found it? So there's often a lot of unexpected things. More often are the expected things, though, of course, like bespoke ceramics or metal things that the blacksmiths made and things like that. But every once in a while, we get something that throws us for a little loop. So before I sign off, I wanted to share with you something new that I just put on the website yesterday. And I think yes, it shows up not reversed like it was on my camera when I was testing this. But this is the web address. So if you go to www.nps.gov/FOVA/FOVA-FROM-HOME.htm. If you go there, you can download a little activity that we put together for kids to do at home, since a lot of kids are stuck at home right now, called Make Your Own Museum. So there's some information to get you started, all your directions to make your own museum exhibit, basically what kids or grown-ups, I'm not going to judge you if you want to make your own museum at any age, will do is, think of what you might collect at home and then create a museum exhibit based on your collection. So after they pick their collection, they'll pick 6 objects, and we have a little template here that's a little rectangle for labels, and you say the object name and then why the object is special. And then you can also, or they can also, make a little sign for their museum that says, welcome to the whatever museum. My daughter is 5, and the other day we were testing this out, and she made a rock museum. This is her welcome to the rock museum sign with some stickers and little gemstones here. And then she did her little labels. I helped her write them because she's 5. And it's a really great way for kids to just kind of learn about what a curator does, how a museum works in this time that we cannot go to a museum to see one, and sort of get that chance to share their interests and learn about sort of the behind the scenes aspect of how an exhibit is made. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that you have fun with this activity if you do it. Please share on social media if you do it. Send us a message or tag us. The hashtag to use is in that packet, so that we can share it with everybody and your kid can be famous, internet famous for a minute. And that's all I have today. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you're staying well and safe, and I hope we'll be back at Fort Vancouver soon. Thanks.